Spider-Man No Way Home has asserted itself into the top 3, possibly top 2, or quite possibly as the best movie in Marvel's sprawling cinematic universe. If you're interested in Marvel or Spider-Man or action movies in general, then that's all you need to hear. I will explain why, and later in this review delve into spoilers, a point which I will clearly checkmark. But if you'd rather know nothing, then the takeaway of this review is this: this film is exceptional. In a year where, for me, so much of Marvel's output has missed the mark, be it Eternals, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, or WandaVision's disappointing finale, No Way Home represents a beacon. Marvel isn't going anywhere. Superhero films aren't a thing of the past. Spider-Man films haven't explored the characters so thoroughly that new ones seem pointless. No, there is a rare positivity to be gleaned. For the first time in a very long time, I've left the cinema from a Marvel film thinking that Marvel's universe is not, in fact, on its way out. Rather, things are only starting to heat up. I know that I personally would not watch this video review until I'd seen the film. I will very clearly checkpoint where the movie ruining spoilers begin, but there are surprises in the soundtrack and the portrayal of these iconic villains and in the performances of the leads that I personally would prefer not to have known about going in. So this is the beginning of the mild spoiler section, where I talk about in vague detail why I liked the things I liked. Nonetheless, if you haven't watched the film yet, I would encourage you to click off now. While in this section I don't discuss the numerous twists, I will discuss the trajectory of the plot and how it retroactively changes the way we look at the Tom Holland films. Stay if you want, but at risk of having the thematic arc exposed. Spider-Man No Way Home isn't just a traditional superhero story about a good guy beating 7 shades of shit out of the bad guys, as all Spider-Man movies are, but in particular this one. No Way Home is the story of Tom Holland's Peter Parker learning what the costs of being Spider-Man are. In Homecoming, Peter Parker sees his escapades as Spider-Man as a game, a hobby, a wholesome teenage activity. He is not a Spider-Man, but rather a Spider-Boy. His goal is to become an Avenger, the same way a smart student with no interest in law might aspire to be a law student before they've even figured out what they want in life. He wants the badge. He wants the recognition. He wants to be something more. Homecoming is a distinctly teenage movie. It's about a kid who goes on school tours, parties, and eventually goes to a homecoming dance, but a kid that must sacrifice his dignity, the respect of his friends, and his own selfish desires for the greater good. And it isn't easy for him. He absolutely does not want to. There's nothing this Peter Parker would like more than to join the Avengers, go on global expeditions, and forget all about school. There's nothing he'd like more than to unmask himself at Liz's party, an instant, easy way to gain respect among his peers. As controversial as it may be to say, the original Spider-Man, Tobey Maguire, represented the Captain America-fication of Spider-Man. As much as I adore those films, Maguire's Spider-Man could always rely on his moral compass and would follow it to the bitter end. For Maguire, it was simple: do the right thing. He was a Boy Scout. Not so for Holland's representation. In Homecoming, Holland's Parker wants what every teenager desires: respect and adoration, and yet he can't have what he so easily could, because to do so would put those who he loves most in danger. In Far From Home, the second in the Holland trilogy, Peter Parker's desires change. He's an Avenger, he's beloved by the public, but he's still picked on at school. He loses interest in being Spider-Man. After fighting aliens in space, defeating a god, and watching his father figure die in front of him, everything is put into perspective for him. Life is fleeting. He doesn't want to die the next day and never get to live the life of a teenager. He falls out of love with Spider-Man, and once again he must weigh up whether his responsibility as Spider-Man is worth more than his responsibility to live a fulfilling life. In the end, Peter Parker chooses to try and do both, with disastrous consequences. He offloads the responsibility of Tony Stark's military force to a stranger, who, in his naivety, he believes he can trust. Finally, Parker believes he can go back to his school trip and live the life of a teenager. He takes his crush MJ to a romantic spot to tell her how he feels. But of course, everything goes wrong, and Spider-Man is drawn back into the conflict that he was largely responsible for creating out of sheer teenage naivety. Then, of course, in the infamous post-credits scene, as a direct result of his recklessness, the entire world finds out his secret identity. This is where No Way Home picks off. Parker's life is turned upside down, but once again, out of naivety, he believes things will find a way of working themselves out. Until one day it hits him like a ton of bricks. Him suffering he can deal with, but the fact that all of his friends and family are suffering out of mere association with Public Enemy #1 leads him to seek the help of Benedict Cumberbatch's Doctor Strange. This is interesting as we see the true selflessness of Tom Holland's Peter Parker on show. He is happy to take responsibility for himself, but as soon as innocents are caught in the crossfire, he can't cope. Holland's Parker has almost always operated on an emotional basis, be it the Washington Monument rescue in Homecoming or the fire elemental battle in Far From Home. Peter Parker will do anything for those closest to him, even if it means putting his neck on the line. But his Achilles heel has always been his naivety, seen most often in the fact that he simply cannot accept that living a dual life is impossible, and has always and will only ever lead to pain. This is seen throughout this trilogy. By abandoning his life as Peter Parker, leaving Liz at Homecoming to instead be Spider-Man, he breaks her heart and is seen as an inconsiderate, selfish loser. Then, by abandoning his post as Spider-Man to be Peter Parker in Far From Home, he endangers the planet. Yet, his naivety propels him to keep trying anyway. It would be endearing if it weren't so consistently disastrous. As seen in the trailers, Peter Parker wants to make everyone forget who he is, but can't imagine a life where MJ, Ned, Aunt May, and the rest of his closest friends forget he ever existed. He goes to Doctor Strange asking him to reverse Mysterio's revealing of his identity, and leaves having destroyed the fabric of space-time because of his consistent refusal to accept that he must choose between Peter Parker and Spider-Man. For comparison purposes, take Iron Man. The original Tony Stark dies far before Avengers Endgame. In fact, the old Tony Stark died in a cave in Afghanistan in Iron Man the First. He left that cave a changed man, someone with a newfound responsibility, someone on the path to redemption. The audience loves Iron Man despite his flaws because Tony Stark consistently gave up everything and put his own needs to the side, all because of his greater responsibility to the universe. Stark never sat in his basement modifying cars, it was always the next Iron Man suit. He was human in that he struggled to make the right choices, but one thing he never did was try to offload his responsibility of being Iron Man to someone else. He knew he had a responsibility. The needs of the world, the responsibility of Iron Man, always came before the needs of Tony Stark. But Stark was a man, where Peter Parker is still just a kid. Not simply by age, mind you. What separates a Spider-Man from a Spider-Boy is their ability to learn, evolve, and set their needs aside. As an aside, that is why there are so many villains in Marvel's world. When godlike powers are bestowed on an individual, more often than not, they simply do not have the mindset to become a hero. They don't have the mental capacity to set their human needs aside for that of the greater good. Selfishness often prevails. It's never easy, and that's why we love Iron Man. Iron Man always struggled to make the right choices. He was always influenced by his humanity. He wasn't the all-seeing gift of God that the post-Endgame world sees him as. He was flawed. Many of the Marvel Universe's greatest catastrophes were caused by his consistently poor judgment calls. And yet why we love Iron Man is because regardless of his guilt, his mistakes, his lapses in judgment, he consistently made not always the right choice, but the selfless choice to put the greater good over his human needs. He created the calamitous super AI Ultron, but then created the AI Vision in a bid to destroy him. The conflict with Ultron kills thousands in Sokovia, and to have this rectified, he co-wrote the Sokovia Accords. In Endgame, Tony Stark leaves his happy family, his wife and daughter, to bring back the millions lost in Infinity War. Not because he craves the adventure, not because of his ego. He says it best himself.
A lot of people didn't.
No, I can't help everybody.
It sort of seems like you can.
Not if I stop. I can put a pin in it right now and stop.
Tony, trying to get you to stop has been one of the few failures of my entire life.
Something tells me I should put it in a lockbox and drop it to the bottom of the lake. Go to bed.
would you be able to rest?
It takes a while, but in No Way Home, Peter Parker tragically learns how to be a hero. Spider-Man takes everything away from Peter Parker, but Spider-Man also gives everything to everyone else. In No Way Home, Peter Parker needs to learn which is worth more. His ultimate decision is equal parts triumphant and absolutely gut-wrenchingly, heartbreakingly tragic. No Way Home isn't the story of a superhero taking on 6 menacing villains. It's the story of the Spider-Boy becoming a Spider-Man. Disney's new Star Wars trilogy has been widely criticized for lacking direction. As outsiders looking in, it is impossible to tell whether they had a plan or not, but if the audience suspects you were winging it, you did something wrong. If the third film in your trilogy elevates the first and second, then you know you've done something right. That is exactly what No Way Home does. Homecoming and Far From Home were criticized for portraying an immature, naive Peter Parker. I agree with the sentiment, but now with the context of No Way Home, everything changes. In Homecoming and Far From Home, we see a kid learning on the job. In Homecoming, Peter Parker goes from a kid who wants the world to see Spider-Man as a mighty Avenger to being content with taking responsibility for the little guy. He stops seeing Spider-Man as a chance to impress Iron Man and sees it for what it is, a friendly neighborhood guardian angel. And yet, in Far From Home, Peter Parker has been to space. He's fought gods. He's lost his father figure. Nobody is content with his decision to be the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, instead heaping the unrealistic expectations of leading the Avengers onto his young, immature shoulders. He crumbles and tries to offload that responsibility at every opportunity. He tries to live a dual life, and that has serious repercussions. What's so interesting about Far From Home is that the film is less of a sequel to Homecoming and more of a prequel to No Way Home. No Way Home takes the unfinished arc of Far From Home and takes it to its spectacular, amazing climactic end, thus elevating Far From Home far beyond its original scope. Perhaps No Way Home will provide food for thought. The creative team at Marvel know exactly what they're doing. Everything is meticulously planned. From Captain America's taunt,
I know guys with none of that worth 10 of you. I've seen the footage. The only thing you really fight for is yourself. You're not the guy to make the sacrifice play, to lay down on a wire and let the other guy crawl over you.
from Loki's supposed
Glorious purpose.
to now the conclusion of the Spider-Boy character arc. No Way Home isn't just an excellent film. It's an excellent bookend to a trilogy, one that elevates everything that came before. It isn't just the perfect end to the story of Peter Parker, but acts as an excellent first chapter in a new book. I hesitate to call a film the best in its genre, but I honestly don't believe there is a film better than this one in the extended Marvel universe. Certainly Infinity War is a fun time, but it's less of a film and more of a roller coaster ride. No Way Home is a more traditional film with acts, arcs, themes, motivations, and truly excellent pacing. Make sure to use the bathroom before the film starts because every second is crucial. It's rare for me not to check my watch midway through a film, especially this year. Even in films I enjoyed, like Dune, I found myself glancing down at my watch, wondering how long could possibly be left. No Way Home flies by, each second filmed with purpose. There are no dud characters, no characters used purely for comedic purposes. Happy Hogan, the punching bag of the Marvel Universe, has a genuinely emotional arc, and one of his interactions with Parker in the final act is nothing short of heartbreaking. Marissa Tomei's Aunt May was criminally underutilized in Far From Home and was, well, at best, utilized, I guess, in Homecoming. In No Way Home, she is absolutely pivotal. And in a star-studded cast with the best collection of performances in a Marvel film to date, she competes with the likes of the esteemed Willem Dafoe. If you've seen the film, you know exactly what I'm talking about, but her effect is profound. Holland himself gives his most emotionally charged performance to date. He transmits such a variety of emotions, speaks thousands of invisible words with his eyes. No Way Home has cemented Holland's Parker as the definitive Spider-Man, and as, coincidentally, the most compelling lead since Robert Downey Jr. took his bow. His delivery is poignant, his physical movements purposeful. Everything about his performance is simply remarkable. As seems to be a common theme, Zendaya and Jacob Batalon provide their most compelling performances in the Marvel world to date. If you've seen the film, you know exactly what I mean when I say that their scenes in the third act never failed to burrow into my heart. Finally, the most compelling performance of the entire film predictably goes to the multi-award winner, world-renowned, never too good for anything, multi-talented, remarkable Willem Dafoe.
I started this company. You know how much I sacrificed? Oh, Max, please.
Norman, the board is unanimous. We're announcing the sale after the World Unity Festival. I'm sorry.
You're out, Norman. Am I?
And did you really expect anything less? Dafoe's Norman Osborn was excellent in the original Maguire and Sam Raimi directed trilogy, but his performance in No Way Home bears comparison to, and trust me, I do not in any way, shape or form say this lightly, Heath Ledger's Joker.
It's gone.
When we talk of the all-time greatest villains in cinema, the astounding Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin is a shoe-in the greatest of all time category. He lends a depth, kindness and vulnerability to the character while simultaneously being the most menacing, most sinister, most unsettling villain to take to film since the aforementioned Ledger. Unfortunately, that is all I can say before I go past the red tape, the point of no return, the contaminated extreme spoiler zone where I expose every single twist and the most brutally effective scenes. Do come back after you've watched the film yourself. Okay, this section will be almost exclusively dedicated to the third act of No Way Home, what is quite possibly the greatest third act in a superhero film to date. And where better to start than with the tragedy of Aunt May. For context, Peter Parker, under the guidance of his ever-moralistic aunt, chooses to set the interdimensional villains free from Strange's lair with intent to cure them. Tragically and predictably, May and Parker's naivety causes them to be caught in the crossfire. You can't help they who do not want to be helped, and just when things start to be looking like they're on the up, Norman Osborn turns, and all 5 of Spider-Man's most deadly enemies run rampant in Queens. Peter Parker is brutalized, beaten to a pulp. Once again, Aunt May believes she can save her surrogate son and rushes to help, only to be killed mercilessly by Norman Osborn. Just before May dies, she says the most quintessentially Spider-Man line that there is.
With great power comes great
responsibility.
In No Way Home, May has the most profound influence on Peter Parker. Parker is ready to send all the villains to their death in their own universe, a distinctly far from home decision. Offload the responsibility, wipe his hands of it, move on. It is she who shows him that he needs to be more than he is, and ultimately, that never say die optimism, that innocence, that naivety gets her killed. Now, Peter Parker has a choice. He can continue down the path his aunt set him on, that of taking responsibility, honouring her memory. Or he can take vengeance. And finally, he makes up his mind. And it isn't the choice of a Spider-Man. It isn't the choice of a superhero. It is the choice of a heartbroken, self-hating, guilt-ridden Peter Parker. He's going to kill Norman Osborn. The revenge plot is not one new to Spider-Man films. In the original trilogy, Maguire's Parker seeks revenge for his uncle's death. In the Amazing Duology, Garfield's Parker does the exact same. They both compromise the memory of their most beloved in a misguided attempt at securing peace. So, poetically, it is they who come to Holland's Parker, entering through a multi-dimensional rift, two older, seasoned Spider-Men who have made the mistakes that Holland's Parker plans to make, and they steer him on the right path. So then, not only does No Way Home recontextualize the other two Holland films, but rather, the entire saga of Spider-Man films in and of itself. Instead of retconning Andrew Garfield's reckless murder spree in search of his uncle's killer, director John Watts makes it a core part of his character. Garfield's rendition of Parker explains to Holland's Parker that he made mistakes, he was reckless and revenge-driven. He doesn't want Holland to end up the same. Speaking of Garfield, his performance is excellent. There's a reason the actor is world-renowned, and he simply does not get the credit he deserves all too often.
Hey. Gwen. Hey. Breathe.
Mark Webb and Andrew Garfield's Amazing Spider-Man duology was criticised for being a poor representation of Peter Parker. In all honesty, I find the entire idea of criticising a representation to be pointless. The comics will always exist. The cartoons will always exist. The Tobey Maguire and Sam Raimi films will always exist. So what's wrong with having a distinct, different, interesting take on Spider-Man, one we have never seen before? I enjoy Garfield's take on Spider-Man because it's different. No Way Home contextualizes that difference, filling in the blanks on what happened after The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Garfield takes Gwen's death very hard and can't forgive himself. He knows he wasn't good enough, not moral enough, not responsible enough, and he spends the preceding years rectifying that. Then, of course, he shows up in No Way Home, and something nobody could possibly have ever expected happens. He actually becomes a decent mentor to Holland's Parker. Maguire's performance in No Way Home is so incredibly consistent with his films. Charming, innocent, caring, and moralistic. The scene where Maguire repeatedly tells Garfield Spider-Man that he is amazing and must repeat it to believe it is so incredibly Tobey Maguire. Then, naturally, it is he who stops Holland from landing the fatal blow on Osborn. He holds the glider and just looks at Holland, wordless. And that simple gesture strikes a chord, because what is a hero other than somebody who inspires greatness? My favourite scene in the film was somewhat spoiled by the trailers. MJ is seen to be falling off of a building. The problem lies in that there is no way this clip would have been shown in the trailer if this was a scene where she died. As such, in the cinema, this scene is initially lacking in stakes. Until it isn't. As Holland's Spider-Man reaches down to grab her, Osborn sabotages him, knocking him far away, leaving MJ to fall to her death. As longtime viewers, there is a symmetry to the Holland trilogy's MJ falling and the Amazing Duology's Gwen Stacy falling. The scene is shot almost exactly the same. It isn't just us who notices this, but Garfield's Parker. Garfield doesn't speak much in the scene, but his facial expressions, his exaggeratedly urgent dive for a character normally so relaxed, is telling. We see MJ falling, but he sees Gwen. When he catches MJ, he begins to tear up, and nobody knows why, except the people who understand its significance. With such few words, emotions so extremely powerful are transmitted. Truly remarkable. This is a film so very tragic, with so many deaths, with incredible stakes and nail-biting tension. But the most tragic part of this film does not involve anybody's death. It involves the single most selfless act from a hero in the Marvel Universe to date. At the film's climax, Doctor Strange finds he can't contain the strangers pouring in from the multiverse. So, Peter urges him to cast the spell where everyone forgets who he is, to stop the unwanted guests pouring in. Strange initially objects, which is so incredibly hard-hitting. Strange is cold, pragmatic, calculated. He always chooses to make the sacrifice play if, and that's only if, it's for the greater good. He is mathematical, almost sociopathic. If you asked him to answer the famous psychological conundrum about steering a train away from 5 people to a single person, or just leaving the room to let nature take its course, he would choose to kill the single person without batting an eye. He is egotistical and emotionless, and doesn't allow feelings to dictate his actions. In a way, then, he is kind of the perfect foil for Spider-Man, who acts directly in the opposite way. Regardless, the fact that Strange objects to casting the spell that would ruin Peter Parker's life is a powerful gesture. With much convincing, Strange casts it, and Holland's Parker goes to bid farewell to his friends. This scene is heartbreaking, emotionally charged, and powerful. Perhaps one of the most powerful scenes in a Marvel film to date. This is where Holland's arc concludes. He goes from a naive Spider-Boy to a matured Spider-Man, who finally understands that by simply having relations, he is endangering the ones he loves most. It is so true, but so incredibly hard to accept. Many cite Iron Man's sacrifice in Endgame as the ultimate sacrifice, laying down your life to save the world. Peter Parker's sacrifice in No Way Home makes Iron Man's sacrifice in Endgame look like the sacrifice of a kid who gives his lunch to the kid who has no lunch in school. I mean, alright, perhaps I'm treading into dangerously subjective territory, but sacrificing your life isn't always the ultimate sacrifice, especially in Stark's case. Tony Stark grew old, lived the life of a billionaire, an icon, a hero, and eventually, as a family man. He experienced most, if not all, of what life had to offer. By laying his life down, he was simply ending the book and closing the final page. Spider-Man's sacrifice isn't just that he laid down his life. Spider-Man wipes himself from the memory of everyone on Earth. He has essentially killed Peter Parker, but walks among friends like a ghost. Nobody misses him, nobody grieves him, nobody cares about him, because nobody even knows him. And he wasn't even old. He hadn't even lived his life. He'd barely been in love. He hadn't even reached his 2nd decade. And that is so much more tragic than laying down your life ever could be. Finally, to conclude, I believe it important to address the ending. Not, mind you, in an effort to explain or rank the film. This ending does not exactly serve as the traditional hero's ending, but rather it signposts a new beginning. No Way Home successfully wraps up the arc of a boy who first wants to be an Avenger, but soon learns that it's far harder to become a man. The ending signals to us that there will be another saga for Holland's Spider-Man, a saga that looks to entail the trials and tribulations of being a superhero in a world that will never be grateful for your actions. I would be remiss not to touch on the effects. Before No Way Home, I was under the impression that Doctor Strange or Black Panther had the best set of effects in the Marvel Universe. Not anymore. No Way Home's visual and aesthetic design is nothing short of astonishing. I wish I could say more, but without a Blu-ray to comb through the film in search of the most standout effects, all I can rely on is my memory. The nanotechnology is, as ever, excellent. Anything involving Strange boggles the mind, and the final showdown repeatedly knocks you off your feet. While I enjoyed the soundtrack, I actually felt that it didn't quite land the way I would have liked it to. Of course, the final rendition of the Homecoming theme is the exception to this, but apart from that, no piece had that special cinema effect where you feel like you're submerged in the grandeur of the music. My favourite scenes in films are almost always inextricably linked to the music, but in No Way Home, the only specific instances where I remember the soundtrack are the final swing and when Garfield's theme plays. Friends of mine have said they heard Maguire's theme, but honestly, I can't recall its placement. As director of the lower stakes high school dramas Homecoming and Far From Home, I struggled to see how he could possibly manage to handle the weight of a multiversal billion-dollar blockbuster. I had no faith in No Way Home. What I took for granted, but what I do not anymore, is Watt's incredible ability to capture humanity, empathy, and emotion in a bottle. In a universe where so many films are just consistent forward marches between action set pieces, Watts has the ability that only the most elite of the Marvel directors have. Create compelling action blockbusters that are interwoven with the sheer humanity of its characters. Joe and Anthony Russo managed this, as did Jon Favreau, as did Taika Waititi. John Watts isn't just a high school drama one-trick pony. He's the entire racetrack. He told a story that doesn't compromise on action or humanity, creating a film equal parts enthralling, captivating, and emotional. Holland will always draw ire simply by nature of the fact that he is the subject of many teenage girls' fantasies. This must be frustrating for Holland. He has such an incredibly hardcore fan base, perhaps the strongest in the world, but as a result is hated by those who don't judge him based on how well he does his job. Rather, they judge him not on his own merits, but out of distaste for the legions of fans who create fan pages and study his every move on social media. Don't be fooled. Holland's performance is remarkable. He has absolutely cemented his place as one of Hollywood's most promising actors. Spider-Man No Way Home is an achievement. Perhaps it was my low expectations. I expected to go in for a competent, fun, jovial 2 hours where I laughed and soaked in the incredible set pieces. Spider-Man No Way Home is all that and so much more. Too many people will discount this film as just a Marvel movie or just a Spider-Man movie. This isn't just an excellent Spider-Man movie. In fact, it isn't even just an excellent Marvel movie. Spider-Man No Way Home is an excellent movie. Full stop. No